Ashes of Valor. A War of Love. Chapter 3. The Fire Remembers. Episode 1. Echoes from the Ember Archives. Time did not stop after the banners fell. It merely shifted its weight. In the weeks following the fall of the Iron Gate and the dissolution of General Volan's coup, Velmora entered an era not of peace, but of reckoning. At the heart of this new chapter stood the Ember Archives, a newly formed coalition of historians, jurists, war veterans, and civilian witnesses tasked with documenting every detail of the war that had nearly consumed their nation. The archives were not merely libraries. They were living memorials. And they began with Cale Rourke and Aurelia Trent. The archives were housed in the reformed High Council Rotunda, once a place of corruption, now transformed into a circle of truth. Testimonies were given in open sessions. Holographic maps reconstructed battles. AI-corrected audio captured thousands of voices, their fear, their fury, their sorrow. Aurelia sat at the center on the first day of tribunal. Her mask was gone. Her voice steady. "I do not speak to defend what I did," she began. "Only to explain why it was necessary. War is not made by monsters. It is made by humans. And sometimes, by those who once loved each other." There was no applause. Just silence. And the recording light glowing red. Cale's testimony came the next day. He stood before the archive circle in his full former uniform. Medals polished, coat pressed, not out of pride, but to remind the world of what power had once looked like. He did not read from a script. "I once thought love would make me stronger," he said. "But I used it as armor. I built walls with it. I justified silence with it." He looked up, eyes locking with Aurelia's across the chamber. "And I forgot that love does not excuse tyranny." Over the following days, hundreds testified. Families of the slain. Orphans of both regimes. Old soldiers with trembling hands who once knelt before both generals. Stories poured like rivers through the rotunda. Some begged for justice. Others asked for mercy. Many simply wanted to be heard. But through it all, a truth emerged, one more painful than guilt or innocence. There were no clean hands left. Only those trying to heal. Late one evening, Aurelia wandered the lower vaults of the archives, where classified logs and recovered relics were kept in stasis chambers. There, she found the damaged hilt of her old sword, the one lost during the sabotage at Emberfall. Next to it, someone had placed Cale's broken officer insignia. She stared at them, side by side. Opposite halves of a war. Back upstairs, Cale watched her from the observation gallery. He held a datapad containing her full tribunal transcript. Every word, every breath. He set it down. And for the first time in years, he cried. Not for himself, but for the fire that still remembered. Episode 2. The war trials begin. Justice was never meant to be swift. Nor painless. The war trials, initiated by the Ember Archives and sanctioned by the Transitional Council of Velmora, were not designed to punish, they were meant to reveal. Not just the crimes of individuals, but the roots of rot that had allowed war to flourish. Every strategy, every silence, every command came under scrutiny. And seated at the very center were the two figures the nation could not forget. Cale Rourke and Aurelia Trent. The tribunal hall, shaped like a broken ring to symbolize the shattered unity of the past regime, echoed with the voices of prosecutors, defenders, and the crowd. Every citizen had access to the proceedings. Broadcasts were translated into 12 dialects. Transcripts were made publicly available. The first case was not Cale's. It was his former intelligence chief, Marich Volan. Volan stood shackled, gaunt but defiant, his voice as sharp as ever. "I did what the people demanded." Rourke lost his edge. He hesitated. "I delivered results." When confronted with evidence of his unauthorized strikes on civilian outposts, he sneered. "The moment we chose democracy over discipline, we signed our death warrant." From her seat, Aurelia stood and addressed him directly. You used my name. You used his name. Volin smirked. It made you stronger, didn't it? Pain sharpens everything. Kale's hands clenched, but he remained silent. The tribunal found Volin guilty of war crimes, disinformation, and unauthorized military escalation. His sentence was not execution, but exile, banished beyond the sable expanse, never to return. Kale objected. He should be made to rebuild what he destroyed. Aurelia, beside him, whispered, let him live with the silence. Next came a flood of lesser trials. Officers who had carried out cruel orders, soldiers who had defected for vengeance, politicians who turned a blind eye in exchange for safety. Some wept, some confessed, others spat their last breath in denial. But the court never lost its focus. It saved the most complex trial for last. Kale Rourke. He walked to the defendant's platform with no escort. No lawyer. No written defense. Only the weight of what he had become. I am not innocent, he began. But I am not only guilty. He laid out his case not in denial, but in cause. He detailed the betrayals of the High Council, the backroom deals that shattered border towns, the famine statistics buried under ceremonial speeches. He spoke of power, how it corrupted not just those who held it, but those who feared to lose it. He did not excuse the surveillance regime, or the failed missile command that killed innocent lives. I made those calls, he said. No algorithm. No order. Me. The chamber fell silent. Then, one voice broke through. It was a mother, once a teacher, whose son had died in a skirmish caused by a failed flamebound interception. She did not scream. She did not cry. She stepped forward, looked Kale in the eyes, and asked, would you trade places with him? Kale's breath hitched. And he said, yes. The tribunal voted for conditional clemency. Kale would remain under public scrutiny, barred from military or political command for life. He would serve as an advisor, tasked with rebuilding what he helped break, not in power, but in humility. Some protested. Others embraced it. Aurelia sat in silence. And when the verdict was read, she rose and left the chamber before Kale could see the tears in her eyes. Not out of rage. But because part of her still wanted to hold his hand. And she didn't know if she ever could again. Episode 3. Secrets of the Frost Tomb. Beyond the veil of city fires and tribunal lights, past the ironclad roads of the rebuilt capital, lay the northern frost line, a treacherous expanse of frozen cliffs, ancient relics, and secrets long buried beneath centuries of snow. It was there, within a long-forgotten military research outpost known only as Frost Tomb, that a discovery threatened to undo everything Kale and Aurelia had just begun to rebuild. And it began with a signal. The broadcast was faint, buried beneath layers of encrypted dead code. It came from a decommissioned beacon, a relic presumed inactive since the Emberfront skirmishes, years before either general had risen. It was Kale who intercepted it, while cross-referencing war logs to assist reconstruction crews. The message was short, cold, mechanical. Archive breach detected. Alpha prototype reawakened. Initiating protocol Red Solstice. Kale's blood ran cold. Only 3 people in Velmora knew that name. He was one of them. The second was dead. The third was Aurelia Trent. He left that night, alone, cloaking his departure in classified aid requests and unmarked transports. But Aurelia was not easily deceived. She found the trail in hours. The flight logs, the pattern of misdirection, the archived military proposal hidden beneath decades of sealed orders. And when she realized where he had gone, she followed. Because Red Solstice was not just a project. It was the beginning of everything. The Frost Tomb lay buried beneath a glacier like a sleeping beast. Kale reached it after days of climbing, frostbitten and breathless, using an old biometric imprint to gain access. The outpost flickered to life around him, lights stuttering in cold corridors, ancient machines humming with ghostly memory. Inside, he found the remains of Project Ember Ascendant. It had been a weapons program, one meant to end wars before they began. But the prototypes had been deemed unstable. Synthetic soldiers with neural bindings, each capable of operating independently, learning, evolving. The council had sealed it away. But someone had reactivated it. Aurelia arrived just hours after Kale entered. She did not knock. She stepped into the tomb and found him staring at a capsule suspended in cryostasis, a figure floating within, part human, part machine, veins laced with glowing circuitry, eyes closed in eternal unrest. "What did you find?" she asked, stepping beside him. Kale didn't look away. "I think we found the reason we were made." On the back wall, written in faded military glyphs, was a single phrase. Victory without conscience. Control without cost. Aurelia reached out, touching the glass of the pot. And whispered. "We were never the first fire." Outside, the storm howled. Inside, the ghosts of war stirred once more. Episode 4. The Widow's Accord. As news of the Frost Tomb's reactivation spread through the upper echelons of Velmoran Command, so too did whispers of an unexpected development, one that would rattle the fragile peace Kale and Aurelia had bled to protect. A summit had been called, not by the Senate, nor by the Flamebound, but by Lady Enchevire, once known as the widow of the Sable Court, the war-hardened matriarch of one of Velmora's most powerful noble houses, and widow to a slain councillor Kale had deposed in his first sweep of purges. She had not spoken publicly in years. Now she had one demand. "Bring me General Rourke and General Trent. Together." The location chosen was symbolic. Viryhold, a towering fortress built into the cliffs of the Sable Gorge, neutral ground in centuries of war. It had been both prison and palace, a place where treaties were born and assassinations whispered behind lace curtains. Aurelia arrived first, clad not in armor, but in a plain traveler's coat, her mask left behind. Kale arrived hours later, escorted by a new security unit still unsure whether to call him so or sinner. The widow awaited them in the Hall of Sundering. A massive chamber walled with obsidian glass, every panel etched with the names of those lost in the last 5 civil wars. She sat on a throne not of gold, but of welded steel, crafted from weapons once used against her family. Her eyes, black as oil, narrowed as the two generals entered. "Look at you," she said, her voice like silk laced with knives. "Not kings, not ghosts, just tired lovers trying to stitch the nation back together with thread made of guilt." Kale stood tall. "You summoned us. And I'm owed that right. You killed my husband, General Rourke. You shattered my house. You gave me silence." Aurelia stepped forward. "Then why invite us instead of sending assassins?" Lady Enche's smile was razor thin. "Because I have what you both want." She gestured to the table before her. On it lay a dossier. 1 page. Classified. Stamped with the same seal Kale had seen in the Frost Tomb. "Red Solstice." "What do you know?" Aurelia asked, voice taut. Enche's eyes gleamed. "Only that the war you fought wasn't yours. That even before you were enemies, before you were lovers, before you were born, Velmora was being carved by unseen hands. And the knife is still moving." She rose, stepping down from her throne. "I offer you the Widow's Accord. My networks, my archives, my loyalty, in exchange for one thing." Kale tensed. "What?" Enche's voice dropped to a whisper. "Make sure my grandchildren never have to wear a uniform." The accord was signed that night. Not on paper, but in blood and memory. Outside, beneath the twin moons of Velmora, Kale and Aurelia stood on the balcony of Viryhold, watching wind sweep across the valley. "She frightens me more than Volan ever did," Kale murmured. "She frightens me because she knows," Aurelia replied. He turned to her. "We still have time to walk away." She looked at him, eyes full of fire. No, now we walk deeper. Episode 5. The Return of the Scorched Sun. The whispers began in the fractured cities first, places that had never fully healed after the war, where power flickered and food lines stretched past crumbling statues. A name resurfaced, spoken in taverns, painted on shattered walls in coal-black ink. The Scorched Sun. To the flamebound, it was a myth. To Cale and Aurelia, it was something far worse. A legacy left unfinished. His true name was Tavian Rourke, Cale's half-brother, long thought dead in the siege of Sarenhold, presumed lost to fire and rubble. But Tavian had not died. He had been taken. Raised in exile by a sect of forgotten militarists, loyal to the first versions of the Red Solstice protocols, the ones deemed too brutal, too uncontrollable even for Velmora's darkest councils. Tavian had been trained, shaped, and burned into something less than human, and more. Now, he was returning. And he had declared one purpose. To finish what Cale never had the strength to do. It began with the Black Beacon broadcast, an unauthorized override of every comm channel in Velmora, from military satellites to children's radio toys. The screen buzzed with static, then revealed Tavian's face, younger than Cale, but crueler. His eyes glowed faintly from neural implants. His voice was calm, venomous. I am the fire you buried. The sun you erased. I watched you fail to cleanse this nation. Now, I rise from your ash. He paused, then added, almost gently. And I will bury her too. In the Ember Archives war room, Aurelia and Cale stood shoulder to shoulder as the broadcast looped. That's not the boy I remember, Cale said, voice hollow. That's not a boy anymore, Aurelia replied. They had fought regimes. They had fought each other. Now they would face bloodline war. Reports followed. Tavian's forces, calling themselves the Cinders, had already taken control of 2 major power hubs near the Frostline. But these weren't ordinary troops. They were engineered, augmented, faster, stronger. Red Solstice technology brought to terrifying life. Tavian didn't want to rule Velmora. He wanted to burn it clean. Cale met Aurelia in the old flamebound cathedral the night after the 3rd Cinder attack. He was shaking. I saw him die, Aurelia. I saw the flames. You saw what they wanted you to see. Cale buried his head in his hands. I made so many mistakes, but he was just a boy. And now he's become the sword I never had the stomach to be. She knelt beside him. Then we stop him together. Not as rulers. Not as generals. She reached for his hand. But as the last 2 who remember who he was. The war was not over. It had only changed faces. Now, the fire bore the name of family. And it remembered everything. Episode 6. Blood in the Senate Hall. The new Velmoran Senate, born in the ashes of the war and tasked with preserving the fragile peace, was never designed for battle. Its walls were lined with statues of unity, its halls with echoes of compromise. And yet, on the eve of the Senate's first full session since the war trials, the chamber ran red. Not with ink. With blood. It began with a coded warning, intercepted by Aurelia's intelligence team. A brief sequence of numbers once used in old Emberfront encryption. A code for infiltration imminent. Cale was the first to recognize it. Cinder Protocol, he whispered. He's coming here. The message reached him only minutes before the Senate doors were sealed. And Tavian Rourke, the Scorched Sun, entered the chamber. He didn't come as a warlord. He came as a senator. Or rather, disguised as one. His augmented troops, cloaked in political robes and diplomatic protocols, stood already inside the chamber before the guards knew to react. The room erupted into chaos. Tavian stood at the center, raising his voice above the terror. This is not a coup, he said calmly. This is cleansing. The disease of compromise has poisoned this nation long enough. One senator lunged. Tavian's guards struck first. and the floor of the Senate Hall was painted in the blood of the people's voice. Aurelia and Cale arrived mid-assault, having forced their way past sealed corridors and mural-blocked sentries. They found the chamber in ruins, flame-choked, bodies everywhere, and Tavian standing atop the fallen speaker's dais. Cale didn't hesitate. Tavian. The scorched sun turned, and for a moment, he looked like a boy again, eyes wide, mouth trembling. Then the implants flared red. "You should have let me burn, brother," he whispered. Cale stepped forward, unarmed. "You were never meant to carry this. Let it go." Tavian's hands trembled. Then he raised them, and the entire Senate chamber shook with an explosive pulse wave from his neural core. Aurelia tackled Cale as the dais exploded. They awoke in smoke. Tavian was gone. The Senate was crippled. And across Velmora, flames rose once more. This time not in war, but in rebellion. Episode 7. The Battle of Two Flames. The uprising began before dawn. They came not in waves, but in sparks, cinder cells igniting across the provinces like wildfire. In border towns, they cut power and communications. In mountain passes, they took out water supplies. In the capital, they struck at the heart, hospitals, archives, transit hubs. Velmora was being suffocated, not conquered. And at the epicenter stood Tavian Rourke, the scorched sun, no longer veiled in shadows. He was seen, heard, revered by the angry and the abandoned. His message spreads faster than fire. Two flames were not enough. Now I burn alone. Aurelia Trent watched from her command deck as the war map bled red. For the first time in years, she felt doubt. Not fear of defeat, but fear that everything they'd rebuilt had been too fragile to last. Cale stood beside her, silent. They had made peace once. But now the peace they forged was being used as kindling. The High Command, splintered and overwhelmed, turned to Operation Flameveil, a full-scale military response to crush the cinders before they reached the capital core. Aurelia opposed it. They want us to panic. Tavian doesn't want a battle. He wants a massacre. Cale agreed. He's testing how far we'll go to stop him. How much of ourselves we'll betray. But there was no time for debate. Cinder forces had taken Eldra's Spine, the most critical mountain corridor linking east to west. If they held it, half the country would be severed. Answer, for the first time since the war's end, Cale and Aurelia marched together to war. They led a dual strike team, veterans of both the Flamebound and former Rourke loyalists, unified under one symbol, a phoenix broken in half, now mended with flame. The assault on Eldra's Spine was brutal. Cinder troops fought with terrifying precision, their minds semi-linked through neural synchronization, Red Solstice protocols Tavian had perfected. They didn't retreat. They didn't hesitate. They simply moved like an organism with one will. Tavians. Mid-battle, Cale and Aurelia reached the summit stronghold, where Tavian waited. He stood in the snow, no weapons drawn, cloak snapping in the wind. Aurelia stepped forward. This isn't justice, Tavian. It's vengeance. Tavian smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. You made peace with a broken world. I'm making sure it doesn't survive long enough to break someone else. Cale raised his blade. Then this ends here. The battle that followed was not just brother against brother. It was memory against belief. Steel clashed. Fire bloomed. Words cut deeper than blades. When it ended, Tavian fled, wounded, but alive. Eldra's Spine was retaken, but the cost was immense. Hundreds dead, thousands displaced. And something else. Cale's arm, his sword arm, shattered by a pulse burst protecting Aurelia. As medics lifted him, he looked up at her. Promise me, he gasped. If I fall, you finish this. Aurelia's voice did not waver. I will. But in her heart, she whispered. Even if it kills me. Episode 8. The Heart of Emberfall. The ghosts had never left Emberfall. Even in peace, even in silence, the old mining town turned battleground still bore scars. Its shattered spires, scorched valleys, and bone-dry wells whispered of betrayal and love, of Cale and Aurelia's final vow. Now, it would become the stage for the final reckoning. Intelligence confirmed it. Tavian Rourke had returned to Emberfall, choosing it not only as a symbolic throne, but as the site of his last stronghold. He had wired the old infrastructure with volatile solar cores stolen from the capital's energy vaults. The message was clear. You either face me here, or I erase what's left of Velmora's heart. A trap. A challenge. And perhaps, a goodbye. Cale, his arm now braced in a skeletal alloy exo-frame, stood beside Aurelia at the edge of Emberfall's ridgeline. Below, plumes of smoke rose like black prayers. Drones circled. The mountain glowed faintly red, not from fire, but from consequence. This is where it all began, Cale said softly. Where we stopped being soldiers. Where we started being enemies. Aurelia didn't speak. Instead, she removed her mask, the last remnant of the flame-bound persona. She let the wind carry it down the cliff. I'm not a ghost anymore, she whispered. Cale reached for her hand. She let him take it. Then they descended. Inside Emberfall, the battle was already roaring. Flame-bound veterans surged through the eastern corridor. Loyalists to the Accord pushed in from the west. But Tavian's forces were everywhere, embedded in tunnels, hidden in ruins, their minds still bound to his will. Cale and Aurelia cut through the chaos with unmatched precision. Even wounded, Cale moved like a storm chained only by honor. Aurelia fought like memory made steel. Finally, they reached the core, the heart of Emberfall, an old power vault converted into a war throne, where Tavian stood. Alone. Waiting. Do you see now? Tavian asked, stepping from the shadows. The world you tried to save built this. It birthed me. Cale stepped forward. Then let me carry you out of it. Tavian laughed, bitter and broken. You don't carry the fire. You bury it. He activated the detonation sequence. 5 minutes to core ignition. Aurelia moved first, rushing the console, disabling link points with desperate speed. Cale and Tavian clashed again, blades screaming against each other in a blur of light and pain. Tavian was faster now, more brutal, rage surging with every blow. You still love her, he snarled. Yes, Cale grunted, and that's why I won't let her die for me again. Aurelia overrode the final fail-safe. But Tavian, realizing he'd lost, turned the blade toward her. Cale stepped in the way. Steel met flesh. Cale fell. Aurelia screamed. And Tavian, seeing the blood on his hands, his brother dying at his feet, froze. In that moment, something cracked behind his eyes. Not guilt. Recognition. Why didn't you stop me? Tavian whispered. Cale coughed, bloodied. Because I still believed you could stop yourself. Tavian dropped the blade. Then knelt beside the man who had once been his hero. And cried. They did not execute Tavian. They did not parade him. They gave him what he never had. A cell with a window. And a chance to choose what to become next. Cale lived. Barely. And in the days that followed, Emberfall was not rebuilt. It was preserved. A memory, a monument. To the fire that nearly consumed them. To the love that refused to die. To the brothers who chose different flames. Episode 9. The Final March. The war was over. But peace, as always, demanded one last march. Not with blades drawn or banners flying, but with open hands, weary feet, and the heavy breath of a nation learning how to walk forward together. The final march was not organized by generals, nor sanctioned by the Senate. It was begun by the people. It started in Darrow Hollow, a village once leveled during the Flamebound's earliest uprising. Survivors, rebels, former loyalists, they gathered without orders, and began walking east. Not to protest, not to reclaim, but to meet. One by one, others joined. Villages, cities, border towns. A river of citizens flooded the old roads, heading toward the Central Highlands, to the ruins of the Ember Assembly, where the first rebellion had declared its oath. They brought no weapons. Only stories. And hope. Aurelia and Cale received news of the march while still recovering in Emberfall. Cale, bound in braces, insisted on walking. Aurelia, though still stiff from her wounds, did not argue. We led them through fire, she said. We'll walk them through dawn. They joined the procession near the old river Talon crossing, surrounded by children who had grown up watching their war unfold in ash and smoke. Aurelia walked with one such child, Lena, a girl who had lost her father in the siege of Shardak Ridge. I hated you, Lena said quietly. I know, Aurelia replied. But now, I think I understand. They didn't speak after that. They just walked. As the march crested the final hill, tens of thousands stood before the crumbled assembly steps, cracked, overgrown, but never forgotten. There, the people of Velmora made no declarations, no treaties. They simply stood. Together. Cale took Aurelia's hand. His voice, broken and hoarse, reached only her. Is it over? She looked out at the horizon. At the families, the old enemies, the new dreams. No, she said softly. But for the first time, we're not alone. At sunset, they lit torches. Not for war, but for memory. One flame passed from hand to hand, illuminating every face with golden fire. A reminder that the fire remembers, but it also heals. Episode 10. The General's Last Order. The war had left no clear victors, only survivors. And in a land as scorched as Velmora, survival meant more than endurance. It meant rebuilding trust, redefining power, and most of all, knowing when to let go. The General's Last Order did not come from a podium or a battlefield. It came in a small room, at dawn, with 2 people and a single parchment. Aurelia Trent, dressed in a worn field jacket, sat before the newly formed Unified Council, composed of former rebels, retired officers, civic leaders, and citizens elected from the march. Her presence still carried weight, but she no longer wore command insignia. I came to ensure Velmora survived, she said, her voice steady. Now I ask to leave it in your hands. There were protests, tears, even anger. Many believed she should lead the reconstruction. Some still saw her as the only one who could. But Aurelia shook her head. Power must pass, she said, or it becomes another war waiting to happen. And then she signed it. Her final order. An official withdrawal from all military and political roles. Across the city, Cale Rourke signed his own, a mirrored document, echoing hers in tone and spirit. No longer the Shadow King, no longer the Scorched General, he would serve only in the background, as a historian and advisor. I fought to save Velmora, he wrote in his final brief. But I learned it does not need saving. It needs remembering. Later that night, Aurelia found Cale waiting beneath the old memorial tree in Emberfall, now encircled by candles lit by children who had never known war. She sat beside him. He handed her a sealed envelope. My last command, unopened, for the archives. She raised a brow. And if I don't archive it? Then burn it, he said, smiling. Some truths aren't for nations. Just for us. They watched the stars together, the silence between them rich and full. I keep thinking about the first time we met, Cale said softly. You insulted me. You threatened to shoot me. I should've. He laughed. She didn't. Then she leaned her head on his shoulder. And whispered. We kept our vow. We burned, but we didn't vanish. And in the official records of Velmora, under the final chapter of the Ember War, one last entry was recorded. The fire remembered, but the flame chose peace. To be continued.